Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Ma'am, I had a question.
Sure.
Uh, in like the assignments tab, it says submit. Like you say, please read narration chapter, like the narration chapter for today, and then it says submit. Like, or is it just like a reminder that accidentally got into the assignments tab?
Yeah, I'm still new to Brightspace, so I didn't actually intend
Okay.
to create a submit button for you, so you're okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. I was like, after I
No,
created
that's
it, I was like, and I didn't want to delete it. So
okay.
yeah, you're good.
Mhm.
Miss Grisham, does it have to be any type of, or can it be any type, like a cartoon?
Any story, cartoon, television show, something you read in a book, they're all stories. Good question. Andre, are you talking?
Just thinking to myself.
Do you have one in mind?
I was gonna do something like I was thinking about a cartoon, but
I would love to hear it. I love stories.
maybe something like Cars or like something Disney related, maybe.
Disney tells great stories. That's why they're so
Mhm.
successful.
Yeah.
They have stakes and they have drama and sometimes they have a ticking clock.
Exactly.
It'd be fun. See if you can recognize other people's stories. Anybody recognize mine?
What?
You recognize my story? What is it?
It's Jurassic Park.
I really do think they should do some mashups eventually.
Yeah.
What if you put Princess Leia in Jurassic Park? How would you handle that? I would watch that movie. One of my favorite movies is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies.
Oh.
Oh, yes. Two of my favorite things. They made that movie just for me, I'm convinced. Love Jane Austen. Love zombies. The universe is kind sometimes.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, wait, somebody's in the waiting room. It doesn't have to be your favorite one, just one you liked. I also liked She-Ra, Princess of Power. They keep trying to do a movie, but hasn't worked out so far. Took them long enough to get to Wonder Woman, also another of my favorites. At least they did that in a halfway decent fashion. Once we have the stories, we're going to discuss how the elements that your book talks about outline what's in your story.
Miss Grisham, can you repeat that again?
Once you post your story, I'll put it in the chat here. You're going to examine the elements of story that your book talks about.
Is it supposed to be about a certain book? Or is it just in general?
Any story. It could be a story your grandparents told you. It could be a movie. It could be folklore. Like I used to read Grimm's fairy tales. And let me tell you, my grandma had the Grimm book, not the Disney version. Lots of blood and gore in those Grimm fairy tales. I mean, I'm an 8-year-old and I'm reading, and Cinderella's sisters are getting their eyes plucked out by the birds, and I'm like, whoa, that's serious stuff. Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, getting his head cut off. Ah, here's some good ones. Okay, let's see if we can identify. Yes, I've seen. Does anybody recognize Carly's story? I do recognize it. In Orlando, yes. Yes, Liberty. That is one of my favorite stories. Yeah. Yes, Lizzie, did you ever like research her life? It's very interesting.
I used to, like when I was younger.
Mhm. Yes, yes, Fabian. That was in my Grimm's Book of Fairy Tales as well. So let's match up some of the elements that the narration chapter. Oh, yes. The little reindeer who is bullied all of his life until he saves the day using his special powers. Ah, yes. Yes, Anurag. I am familiar with that story as well. So one of the things that your book talks about as an important element of stories is context, and that's what a lot of you are giving me very effectively. Context is basically the answer to the reporter's questions, right? Who, what, when, where, and then we get into why and how. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like what they do at the beginning of a play. If you've ever read a play, instead of seeing it at the beginning, they'll list who the characters are going to be, the setting, right? Um, so where does my story take place? Like, do this for your story, everybody. Where does your story take place? Mine takes place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Ooh, I want to see that movie, Alyssa. Is that the movie I'm thinking about? North Pole, yes. So yeah, good stories give you a place to put your imaginings. Black Beauty was one of my favorite ones when I was a kid. I wanted a horse. Is that the Powerpuff Girls, Reagan? Africa, France. Yes, the Powerpuff Girls are awesome. Anvil. Look at Jane. Jane, what's your story? Frog Prince, yes. New Orleans, Wild West. Sometimes the setting can be like another character in the story, right? But at the minimum, it has to give you a place, an atmosphere to put these people. Okay? Usually, you don't notice when the story is the settings is good, but you sure notice when it's hard to imagine, right? Deep in the mountains, Townsville, yes, Wild West. So a good story will tell you these things. Where are we? When are we? Um, the next paper you're gonna write, you're gonna tell me a story. Um, Many times people forget to tell me when they are. So like, did this take place a few months ago? Did it take place when you were a child? Because that can make a difference in our perception of the story. I once had someone write a story about she was home alone, somebody knocked on the door and she was terrified and she hid and she didn't answer the door. And all of us were like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you go answer the door? And then finally, you know, when we asked her in the peer review, she's like, oh, this was like the first time I stayed home by myself. And I was like, you know, 10 years old. Well, that makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Right? Versus me being here, you know, and somebody knocks on my door and I suddenly become terrified, you know? As a kid, yeah, I remember that. I remember being scared, you know, the first few times I stayed home by myself. Andre, is that, shoot, what is the name of that?
It's a newer.
Was it newer? Because it reminds me of an older one. Hero High. Have you ever seen that? That's like the plot of Hero High also.
I can't say I have.
Yeah, it's a pretty old movie. It's a Disney movie.
It's a
It's a high school for superheroes.
Oh really?
Mm-hmm.
Then
It's a good movie.
I might have then.
Cheesy, but
I mean, what movie isn't cheesy? There's a lot of movies that are cheesy.
this is true. Christian, a kid who joined the wrestling team just to be like his dad. That sounds like an interesting story. And a good story, as well as having a good setting and establishment of character. Like if you introduce a character, right, you need to let us know who they are. So if Bob walks in, who's Bob? Is he your best friend? Is he your uncle? Is he your next door neighbor? Andre? I can't hear you. Activate your speaker.
Are you talking to me?
I thought you were talking to me. If you're not, that's okay.
Oh no.
Talking to someone else. Okay.
Yeah, I accidentally sent my message privately to Fabian at first, so I fixed it.
So the context is who the people are, where they are, when they are. Got to establish that for your story. So what else does the chapter talk about as essential elements of fiction besides context?
Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah, I'm typing it in the chat now.
Okay.
So if you have your book handy, oh, wait, I think I just typed it to Christian. Sorry. Oh, wow, Alexa. A message, yeah. A main idea, right? So, if you had to look at your story, what would you say the message of your story was?
I really think it would be, I really don't know, nature versus man, kind of, or brotherly love.
Okay, so you're looking at the classic conflicts in literature. Yeah, there's some classic conflicts that work if you want to tell a story, if you want to write a story. So you have things like man versus nature, right? Where it's about what does that essential struggle say? Does it say nature is misunderstood? What do you think?
I would say yes.
You know, him being afraid and then overcoming his fear too could be part of it. Like if I had to look at Star Wars, it's the whole, you know, somebody who doesn't understand if you're following Luke Skywalker. Also, he doesn't understand who he is and sort of a coming of age story where he discovers his abilities and, you know, develops confidence in himself in order to destroy the Death Star. Novels tend to have sometimes multiple themes. Short stories will focus usually on one. Truth and honesty, yeah. So the boy who cried tiger, basically, we call it the boy who cried wolf. In some stories, the one I'm heard growing up, that basically if you get a bad reputation for lying, you know, you will not be believed. Teamwork and family, yeah. Imagination. Mhm. One. So the other classic conflicts are man versus man. Very good. Harry Potter versus Voldemort. Yes. Uh, man versus supernatural. Trying to think. Anybody giving us is your whose story might be man versus supernatural? Would that be the Frog Prince? Or Snow White versus the witch? I mean, you could argue for man, woman versus woman, but features versus man versus self. The Lion King kind of strikes me as man versus self because it's all about him overcoming, you know, what happened in his childhood in order to become the next king and avenge his father's death. So we have information. There's one element that's going to be in all of the chapters that we read. See, we talk about these so you can use all of these techniques as you need them in whatever kind of writing you're going to do, whether it's a research paper or something you write for work. Capturing people with the elements of story, even if they're not always aware of what you're doing, can help make your writing more compelling. Okay. So we have context, theme or message. We also have a basic organization, right? So what order is your story told in? What happens first? What happens second? Mine kind of starts almost in the middle. I mean, if you look at the whole Star Wars universe, it definitely starts towards the middle of the end. I don't know. Well, no, we've got the Next Generation. I'm avoiding some of the new Star Wars movies, I will be honest. I was not impressed with the first one that came out, and I've heard bad things. So, yeah, going to school to be the wizard. We start when Harry's 12, right? And then everything happens in chronological order, usually. So you can tell your story in chronological order. First, second, everything in the order that it happens. That's a very common way to tell stories. You can start in the middle and flash back, like here I am sitting on death row, reflecting on my choices in life. Right? I want to know what are the choices that has led him to this place or her to be on death row, right? Chronological, yeah. The Englishmen invade her tribe's territory, then she steps forward to mediate. But Harry's story really starts when he gets, the letter from Hogwarts. We get the background. He's living with the Dursleys, right? So pay attention to the order of your story. Order is important.
Ma'am, I had a question. So when you say like a story has to be chronological, does it mean chronological as in the sequence of events that happen in the story depending on its context, or it's chronological as long as it's understood by the readers or the audience?
The chronological order generally is when you start with the sort of inciting event and then tell what happens after that in the order it happens. It does not have to be chronological for a story. It's just one of the ways you can organize events.
Oh, okay.
Lots of stories are told in different ways, like some start at the end,
Yeah.
and work their way back. Chronological is just one of the most common ones. More important than like having like just a chronological order is having some kind of organization. Have some method for your madness to keep events organized. Whether you're flashing back, make sure you give us enough clues like 10 years ago, and then we're like, oh, okay, right? We need those kinds of transitions. So have a method to keep events organized, and usually most people are familiar with chronological order, but it's not the only method you can use.
Got it.
Good question. So if you're new to telling stories, you might want to start with just telling it in the order things happened. That's chronological order. But if you want to play with stories, you like some stories that are told sort of from the middle backward. I usually don't like stories that tell me the ending. I've only ever read one book that did that well, called Bel Canto by Anne Patchett, where she tells you what will happen, but then she tells you the story in such a way you really don't believe that it's going to happen. How did she do that? Oh, it's such a good book. It's about a hostage situation in an embassy. It's a really good story. So just have some method for organizing your events, whether it is chronological. So you want transitions, time transitions. You want to keep your verb tense consistent. Sometimes you want to tell a story like it's happening right now because it lends a sense of immediacy to it. So, for example, I think is a student essay in your book still challenging my fears? I haven't looked to see what the new one is. The story is about a guy who's basically flying a plane for the first time. So he tells it like, I get in the plane, I'm nervous. I'm trying to remember everything that my instructor taught me. It feels like we're sitting there with him. Are you guys following me? Whereas if he told it in the past tense, I got in the plane, I checked it feels more safe know what I'm saying? There's more of a sense of tension and like we don't know what's going to happen if he's telling it in the present tense. That can be tricky if you're not used to using verb tenses, but consider it if you want to create a sense of drama. But a lot of you will be talking about past events, so past tense is fine. Just be consistent. If you shift in time, it's okay to shift the past tense if you're shifting backward, right? But you have to let us know that you're doing that before you shift tenses. So we have the message, we have the order things are told in. Here's one that people neglect sometimes in favor of telling us everything, and that is selection of detail. Okay? You can tell the same story and it can be very different depending on the details that you choose, because the details you choose lead us toward the message. Okay? So, for example, sometimes what they leave out in a story is just as important as what they tell us about. So in the story, we don't see Princess Leia in my story. We don't see her stealing, getting the plans to the Death Star, getting captured or any of that. Well, a little bit of her being captured, but it really is focusing on Luke's story about figuring out who he is. So they select the details. So I could tell you 2 different stories about my wedding day, and if I had 2 different messages about that, they would be 2 very different selections of detail. So there are things we call rites of passage. These are events in your life that signal you are changing from one stage of your life to another. So you guys think of what we consider a rite of passage in our society, where you shift significantly to another stage of your life. One is getting married. For some people, you don't have to get married. I'm just graduating high school, definitely. Moving out of your parents' house, getting a driver's license is another one. Yes, good. Having children, definitely. Many of you probably haven't experienced that one yet, but it's a big life changer. Yes. First job. So those are a lot of the ones that signal things are changing. Going to college, right? All those things. So if I wanted to tell my wedding day story as a rite of passage, I would focus on the events that made me realize my life was changing. You guys following me? So I get up in the morning. I don't necessarily tell you I got up at 8 a.m. unless that's a significant detail, right? Some people, this is okay for the shitty first draft. If you need the alarm clock to go off and for you to wake up at 8 a.m. to get you into your story, that's fine. Later on, you just need to ask yourself in the revision, do my readers care what time I got up and is it significant to the story? If it's not, cut it out and cut to the good stuff, right? Focus on the stuff that's really interesting. So maybe I don't tell you I got up, but I'm eating breakfast and I'm eating Fruit Loops and I'm thinking, oh, I'm getting married. Maybe I should eat something more mature than Fruit Loops, right? Then what I'm eating for breakfast is relevant, okay? What if I told the same story, but I didn't want to make the point about my life is changing from one stage to another? Instead, I'm going to make the point that my family is crazy. Okay? Then what I ate for breakfast isn't necessarily relevant unless like my crazy Aunt Betty came over and made a traditional dish from our, heritage that involves sauerkraut and borscht and whatever. Then that would be relevant. If I don't have any crazy relatives at breakfast, however, I'm going to skip that part and focus on the details of the story, right? Maybe show them at the wedding being crazy, doing crazy stuff. So when you're telling your story, you don't have to tell us everything. Select the details that make your point. because we will pay attention to whatever you pay attention to. And we will be trying to figure out your message from the events that you share with us, right? So what is something in your story they leave out because it's not important? What they eat for breakfast, yes. If that gets you into the shitty first draft, start there. Sometimes to get your mind going, you need a place to start that feels normal to you and chronological to you. Okay? Just later, like how do you play up the events that, if they went to the bathroom, if they took a shower, right? What they wore, if it's not relevant. In The Lion King, we see Simba meeting his friends, but we really don't see those years between when he met them and grows up, right? They do a whole flash forward because we kind of get the sense of the Hakuna Matata from their meeting, and we kind of know how that all went. Don't worry, be happy. And then the really important thing is when he has to confront who he is and go back and confront his father's killer, right? So those are the details they focus on, the big events when he was a little cub, and then they flash forward. We don't need the whole, 10 years or whatever of him growing up, because unless something happened that changes who he is, that's not significant to the story they want to tell. Okay, we have about less than a minute left here, so we're going to take our 5-minute break. Then we will come back and continue discussing what makes a good story. So think about your story and the elements that you like about it, what goes into it. Okay, I'll see you guys at 8:45.